Great. Thank you so much. So actually, I wish I had more time with you because it's a lot of really great
Mhm.
information. So we've got about 12 minutes or so. If you'd like to ask a question, if we do have time, although it's very limited, you can raise your hand in Zoom. So to get right into it, so for doctor, oh, actually, real quickly, because I think this is very important. How can people follow you and keep up to date on your current work?
I am social media phobic. I apologize.
No,
I've said what I have to say in sickening. If you want to understand this stuff, this is just scratching the surface of the problem. I spent 6 years writing sickening. I dropped out of litigation because money was changing hands, but we weren't getting any closer to the real truth of this coming out. I spent 6 years writing sickening. It's a thorough analysis of these what's going on, and it's written for non-medical people. It's also written for medical people. There's plenty of references, but that's how to find out what's going on. Now, I'll answer my emails. You can email me at johnabramsonmd@gmail.com. And if you have a question, just email me and I will respond.
all right, great. Thank you. And is anyone else taking up this mantle and doing work like this?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, there are people. There are a number of people, but the problem is that the mainstream media there's an iron curtain that's come down in the mainstream media. So the first book I published in 2004, I did all sorts of TV appearances and radio appearances and op-eds and magazines and so forth. There's been almost nothing after this. The Pharma has gotten its feet underneath itself, and it has prevented the. It's like a chain reaction can't get going. It's like this information. When people hear it, they get excited. When I lecture to doctors at grand rounds in Chapel Hill or Sloan Kettering Division of Ethics. People get excited about this. But once they walk out their door, they walk into the regular world because the media won't cover it. So it doesn't seem to be legitimate. So what we've got to do, and if anyone has any ideas, I am open. What we've got to do is get this information out to the public so that the discussion can start and a chain reaction can start about how the American people are being wronged by the rampant commercialism in the medical knowledge that doctors rely on. Without that chain reaction, nothing can happen.
And how does the impact of having commercials air on the major cable stations for these pharmaceutical drugs impact their coverage of issues like this and the dangers of these pharmaceutical drugs?
Right. So I have been told, I can't quote the source and I can't verify it, but I was told by a major network health director that the unspoken rule was that there will be no criticism of pharma on any segment of TV that's bounded by a drug ad. And I believe that half of what's going on with those drug ads is so that pharma has swept criticism out of the media. It also creates a tremendous distortion because those drug ads, they don't tell you how many people have to be treated in order for one to improve, what alternative methods of therapy, pharmaceutical or non-pharmaceutical, how alternative methods compare to the drug they're advertising. They don't tell you the real cost. I think it's a sin to put in an ad that copay may be $0 or $5 when the cost to society may be 1,000 or two or $10,000 per month. So the drug ads are here to stay. I've been told by honorable lawyers that they're a manifestation of our First Amendment right of free speech. And I can believe that. Drugs have a useful purpose. It's not like cigarettes that don't have a useful purpose. They have a useful purpose, but it's within the ability of the FDA and the Congress to set rules that make that advertising truly educational. How many people do you have to treat in order for one to get better? How many people do you have to treat to harm one? What's the real cost to society? What's the benefit of lifestyle changes? What's the benefit of less expensive older therapies? If they would do that and take the dogs and frisbees and babies out of it, then the advertising could actually serve a useful purpose.
And is there any non-governmental body that is trying to, whether in the United States or outside of the United States, that trying to aggregate that information of what, older drugs are as or more efficacious and anything like that?
Yes, in the other wealthy countries, there's health technology assessment. Um, we have an organization called ISER, which is not governmental, which has participation of people who have financial ties to the drug companies, that does cost effectiveness research. But for example, for Trikafta, the cystic fibrosis drug, that is costs $322,000 per year, and the FDA label says that its benefit is limited to 14% improvement in lung function for people with cystic fibrosis, and one infection that doesn't happen every 3 years in people with cystic fibrosis. And for that, the drug company charges $322,000. So that was evaluated by ISER, and ISER said, I think, I'm not positive this is exactly right, but I think they said you need to cut the cost by by 3/4, down to $80,000 or so. Now, that seems like a radical proposal, but the two people who reviewed that, or two of the people who reviewed that, were both financially tied to the manufacturer of the drug. So supposedly we have that function being done in the United States, but it's not being done independent of the drug companies. We
Great.
need that.
Great, thank you. And for well-meaning medical professionals who do look to these journals to try to find out what's going on in their field and therefore, make medical decisions that are actually beneficial for their patients, what strategies would you suggest that these healthcare professionals do to stay informed about the genuine efficacy and safety of medications beyond what the pharmaceutical companies communicate to them?
That's an excellent question. It's a little complicated, and I would be happy if medical professionals want to talk to me about this, if we could get a group together. But there are FDA documents and the FDA label that does provide more information about the drugs than is in the medical journals. For example, in the Paxlovid label, the drug for COVID that supposedly shortens the duration of COVID.
John, I think oh, there we go. You froze for a second. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The FDA documents show that people who have been vaccinated and or have had COVID will shorten their clinical symptoms of COVID from 14.1 days to 13.8 days, meaning minuscule. But it's hard to get that information. So if you go to the drug label and the FDA documents, you can see that. Now that requires some degree of working together in a workshop, which I would be happy to do. If professionals would like to do that on the web, I would be happy to do that. So there is more information, but it's hard to get to without training, specific training on accessing.
So last year we had a speaker on who one of the things that they do is their organization reads all of the peer-reviewed journals in the English language, and then they aggregate it and they make content for it that is accessible to the general public, and the individuals, quite popular. And during the Q&A last year, I'd asked him about your work, suggesting that this was a problem, and that and correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't think you tackled it in this year's presentation, that the peer reviewers of the medical journals or the articles in medical journals don't necessarily get the underlying information. They just get like the study design and the conclusion, and that's all they're really reviewing. Is that true?
That's true, except take out the necessarily. They don't get it.
Okay. And then so I brought this up to this individual, and they said that, oh, it's getting so much better that the journals are really starting to get the information the information that these studies were actually based on. Do you find that to be changing in any way, shape, or form, or is that statement?
It's changing, but it's changing so slowly and getting to a material difference in the quality of the information so slowly that I think it's doing more harm than good, because the docs, well-meaning docs like the doc you're referring to, believes it's getting better, but we're not getting the data. The data aren't there. If it's going to make a difference, it's pretty simple. The peer reviewers need to have independent analysis of the full data set, and the data need to be transparent at the time fully transparent at the time the journal article is published. That's transparency. They're going to do baby steps up to that would take 1,000,000 years to get to full transparency. So in a formal sense, he's right, they're making progress. In a functional sense, it's not making any difference. And when people make those claims, I'm sure that the doc you were talking to is talking in good faith, but what they're doing is actually providing cover for the lack of progress of true functional transparency.
So we have about 2 minutes left, maybe a little bit less. So I'm going to ask you two quick questions related to each other. One is the awareness of this issue growing? And is there anything that's going on that leaves you optimistic about things to come with regard to these issues?
That's a great question. And this is the craziest thing that I don't understand. I've been completely blackballed by the liberal media, complete. Right-wing media is interested in what I have to say. And I've been invited twice by Hillsdale College, everybody will groan and boo, to speak at health forums. And they have been completely interested. They transcribed one of my talks. They sent it out to 6 million families. And the right is concerned about the public not being served by the commercial takeover of our medical knowledge. And the left doesn't want to talk about it. If anyone can explain this to me, please send me an email.
Well, I will say that I have found the last few years very confusing as far as where my views, which have remained unchanged, have ended up on the so-called spectrum where
exactly,
so I won't get into politics per se, but it has become very confusing. But I think get the message out wherever you can. So that can, well, anything that leaves you optimistic, is that what leaves you optimistic? Is that some people are trying to listen to you?
Yeah, it's hard to feel optimistic about the right edge of politics carrying us to the promised land, but sorry to be partisan, but what does discussions like this in public, posting this on YouTube, at some point, we've got to hope that it will create a critical mass and that chain reaction will start. That's the only hope. And that everybody who understands this, talk to your family, talk to your doctor, make this conversation polite and not a wacko conspiracy theory. We've got to normalize this conversation. And that's very hard to do for non-professionals, for non-full-time pharma critics, because they're so good at obfuscating the truth. And like the doc who in good faith said to you, look, we're collating a lot of information and transparency is getting better. That's in my opinion, that public statement takes us in the wrong direction, because it's harder to understand once people believe that. It's hard to understand how impossible it is for doctors to get transparent information.
Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank you. I want to say that, as far as sounding effective and not sounding, out there, which a lot of times this type of stuff can sound, you do a phenomenal job, and you going out there and speaking on this gives me a hope and a sense of optimism on this issue. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for the kind words, and thanks for getting this message out.
Thank you. If we can unmute the audience so they can share their appreciation for Dr. Abramson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Courage.
I watch your book.